Well, good afternoon, and welcome to our panel discussion today on integration for the Missile Defense Enterprise. I'm Tom Karako, Director of the Missile Defense Project. We're really happy to have with us two folks from the National Academy of Public Administration, Bill Greenwalt and Roger Kodat, who to talk to us about their brand new report on this important subject, which was of course congressionally mandated. So we're going to go through a lot of weedsy stuff on I think you said the managerial geek aspects of the missile defense enterprise. But before we get to that, and by the way, I really enjoyed chatting with your team during the process of this report. Before we get to that, could you talk to us a little bit about Napa, the National Academy of Public Administration? And just sort of give us some background on that. Roger, you want to address that?
Yeah, I'd like to. Thanks, Tom, and thanks for all the support that you gave to our study team as we work through this very busy year on missile defense. So Napa sounds like we sell windshield wipers or reds and whites, but the National Academy of Public Administration was founded in 1967 and was given us Congressional charter in 1984. And so the Congress does have an opportunity to mandate in law work to us as we're tantamount to the National Academy of Sciences. But we focus on public administration. How do organizations work more efficiently and effectively? And we were, in this case, we're nonprofit. We're not government employees. We are nonpartisan and independent. And some of those adjectives that I just used are very attractive to organizations that want to have truly an outside view. As the Chinese say, if you want to learn about water, don't ask a fish. So we had an opportunity in this case as the National Academy to do this work. But all of our work is focused on organizations, whether it's the federal government, the state, or even local government. And this was truly a very interesting project for Napa.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about the folks on your team? I think it was about 5 people or so.
Actually, much more than that, but go ahead. You can talk about your study team. Then, as far as I chaired the panel, and Napa has, I don't know, about 700 or what?
1,000, nearly 1,000,
nearly
sir.
1,000 of fellows. And most of us are either ex-government employees or professors in the public administration departments and government departments and economics departments around the country. And so for each of these studies, Napa reaches out and of individuals with areas of expertise and to have an overarching panel to discuss these issues and eventually agree on the report. And then Napa also has, and Roger's the project director on this, a permanent set of employees who are out there doing the interviews and bringing forward all the data to the panel. And so we had a terrific panel of Ambassador Westphal, ex-acquisition people. I mean, it was just a really, really good, and in addition to the managerial expertise we had on the panel, the project team itself.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have several senior analysts working with me, John Tucker, Maria Rapuano, Karen Hardy, and James Higgins. So it was truly a group effort. We kept ourselves incredibly busy with the great leadership that we received from Bill and the other fellows that were part of the panel.
Well, great. It's a great report. It's an interesting report, and we're happy you came over to CSIS to do a public rollout about it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
we really appreciate it.
You bet.
You get as much press as we can get. We appreciate it.
You bet. So let's talk about the congressional mandate for this. Section 1675 of the FY22 NDAA. So that was back in calendar 21. What was your charge from Congress? What did they ask you to go look at?
Roger, you want to?
Yeah, so not much.
Just everything. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I was.
We were invited to, first of all, provide in this report a listing of the roles and responsibilities of the various components of the Department of Defense and the full range of activities connected with missile defense. And with that, it includes looking at setting requirements, acquisition, including research and development, and then operational sustainment. That was just the first leg under the stool. And the second was to look at those roles and responsibilities for the missile defense, and I'll double back on the missile threat types, but then to think through, are there gaps in this roles and responsibilities that we should bring to the attention in the report? And then thirdly, was to think about how can these mission sets be deconflicted if needed? Where is there unnecessary duplication and waste? And to result in a more efficient operation of the full set of activities in the missile defense enterprise. The fourth thing was to look at a timetable of recommendations, and the fifth is to make administrative and legislative recommendations. The missile defense, in consultation with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which was our interface with the DoD, and also in consultation with our panel and with Congress, we concluded together that the missile defense enterprise was to include ballistic, hypersonic, cruise, and UAS, or uncrewed aircraft systems, those four threat types. So we did not look at air and missile defense, as you can see, but rather, and tongue-in-cheek, only the four missile threat types, and for the activities that I mentioned already with requirement setting, acquisition, and operational sustainment. It's also important to note that this report was to be done on an unclassified basis for 12 months. To that end, it really harkens back to what Napa is about, which is we're an organization that looks at how can a complex enterprise become more effective and more efficient in its operation. So being at an unclassified level, we were largely looking at organizational behavior and how an organization's segments operate together or not to have an effective outcome. And that was largely what we focused on.
And I think congressional intent, they essentially wanted to see an independent evaluation, but they also understood some of the inability of some government agencies to actually do this type of evaluation. We all love the GAO, but this might be a 5-year effort for the GAO. But the National Academy of Public Administration can move a little bit faster, even though we have many GAO evaluators and auditors on our system. But it's like they wanted to do this. They wanted to do this quickly. They wanted to get it within the legislative cycle, and so we have tried to deliver.
Good. So how did you go about that? What was your methodology, and who'd you talk to? How'd that go?
Well, I'll just jump in, Bill, for a second to just say, first of all, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, our principal interface, and Deputy Assistant Secretary Hill were incredibly supportive of this work from day one. And it was a very robust and healthy communication set. But it then led to, with their support and encouragement and guidance, an incredibly valuable and healthy contribution from virtually everyone we reached out to across combatant commands, the Joint Staff, the Missile Defense Agency, the Space Development Agency, services, Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment. Really across the board, we received positive and excellent sets of contribution to the work that we were doing. We even were invited to Schriever Space Force Base, which was an eye-opener for our team to see the men and women at work who do this work day in and day out. But we met with more than 150 individuals, 4-star general, 3-star general, 3-star admirals. We had also all levels of services and ranks, as well as civilian personnel meeting with us. All that said, we were at one point in a conversation with the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and at the end of the project, one of our contacts said, I don't think that an external party doing research on issues in the department, in our experience, has had the access to so many senior officials as you have had. That was a great credit to the Department of Defense, to be sure, but it also reminded us of the importance of the work that Bill led as the panel chair.
Gotcha.
And, we were not this wasn't an adversarial type of, process. This was essentially, we were going in and basically trying to document who does what. And so from a methodology standpoint, it's here's where, here's what the documents say people should be doing, interviewing, here's what they are doing, and then just trying to make some sense out of the various roles and responsibilities that are out there in this missile defense enterprise.
Well, let's cut to the chase. What were your main findings with response to these roles and responsibilities? What were your big takeaways?
I think the first big takeaway was we actually were able to try to define them. And I think that's, putting up that matrix and identifying who does what was, I think really, to me, one of the biggest benefits of this work. And of course, when you look at that roles and responsibilities, well, they're kind of all over the place. And I'll let Roger kind of follow up on that, but it's a very, very disparate number of organizations, of capabilities, of systems that have been developed over the last 50 years that don't always kind of talk to each other and don't always work as well as I think we'd like to see. But go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, it was intriguing at first, and this is not a condescending remark in any way, but it was intriguing at first to ask our counterparts at the department, in a service, in a command, or somewhere else, can you just hand us the roles and responsibilities list that you have? And trust me, we weren't being in any way disrespectful in the spirit of the question, but there wasn't such a list that we were given anyway. And so we have to turn around and thank our counterparts who reviewed our draft report. Did we get this right? Because we then went into a discovery mode, as Bill just mentioned, of trying to discover what are those roles and responsibilities. To some extent, for hypersonics and ballistic missiles, the Missile Defense Agency has a fair number of responsibilities there. But with respect to crews and UAS, there's a different patchwork that was put into place in our report. We hope very much and trust that the congressional requesters, as well as the people with whom we worked at DoD, would find those roles and responsibilities helpful. But it was a challenge from the start, and we hope it's a contribution.
Well, I think in some respects, and Roger, you kind of made a joke about it at the beginning in terms of the magnitude of and the scope of it. What comes to mind for me there is, it's a comment by Assistant Secretary of Defense John Plum. I think last year he was testifying and he said, look, missiles have become weapons of choice for our enemies, but even frankly for us as well. And so I think that kind of speaks to the magnitude of all these different entities within DoD trying to get after this. In that vein, there was something I noticed in the report that you framed this in terms of what you call the missile defense enterprise. And I remember writing an article back with my colleague Wes Rumbaugh back in 2017 where we said, hey, we need to begin thinking about all of this stuff as an enterprise. You picked that up. Can you give me your sense of the degree to which it is a cohesive enterprise, or is this an enterprise in becoming?
It's an enterprise in becoming. And I think even going back into roles and responsibilities, which is the building blocks of the enterprise. Everyone, in this understands what they have to do, and they have a mission, and they're performing it admirably, but just as you're saying, the threat is changing. Missile defense is no longer kind of a boutique issue that we can think about, later. As we're seeing in Ukraine, and as probably the future of warfare evolves, this is the future, and we need to change the way we think about this, and not from just a boutique, but an actual, this is what is defending the nation today, and we're defending our troops, and whether they're in Asia or whether they're in Europe or in Africa or wherever. And we need a systemic way of looking at how we do this mission. So I think it's evolving, or let's say, it needs to evolve to a larger level. And again, the threats are not just ballistic missiles, which we've talked about for decades. It's cruise, it's UAS, it's air breathing, it's coming from the water, maybe coming from space. All the things that you've been looking at for the last several decades is coming to fruition. How are we going to managerially organize to address those threats? And that's essentially why a group like the National Academy of Public Administration can be helpful in doing this.
No, we are not experts in defense. The first name that comes to your mind when you hear Napa is not the Department of Defense. Our work is spread out amongst many different agencies. But what we do bring to the table is this expertise in understanding how a complex organization has a cohesive response to a deadly and fast-moving threat. And what we did is look very much, strip away the familiar, strip away, this is about missiles, and take a look at complex organizations, not many analogs to the missile defense enterprise. Let's just agree, thankfully. But to take a look at that and try to discern what are ways to think about the problem it's addressing as an organization, a complex one, and all roads lead to a notion that there has to be an integration and therefore a sense of an enterprise. And if the adversary, I dare say, understands and observes that the United States and the department is looking at this complex threat with so many potential seams that it is a holistic, interoperable organization that when one piece moves, the other piece knows about it, that is what formulates an enterprise.
Yeah.
All complex organizations have multiple seams. And the issue is, how do you manage those seams? And each individual unit is going to optimize whatever it does based on itself and its own goals. And the larger enterprise may think that's okay, that's good. We want them to do work on this mission, but at the same time, there may be greater needs, and some of the seams need to work, and information needs to flow. And for that reason, you need an integrator or an integrating capability to work between all of those all the complexity that arises from having so many seams.
Yeah, you both use that word seams. I'm reminded of a smart guy I know, an Army air defender, who wrote an article about the word seams in the integration, where he says, look, seams it seems a four-letter word, but seams are the stitching that tie things together, and seams are okay. Assuming that they are in fact being tied together appropriately, and it sounds like that's what you're trying to get after in terms of this. And it's interesting, the magnitude again. You're talking about the corollary of them being weapons of choice is, as the 2022 Missile Defense Review and subsequent testimony by Dasty Hill has said, missile defense is not a boutique problem; it's a central problem for the Department of Defense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tom, I want to add something, if I may, really quickly to what you just said. And Assistant Secretary Hill was very gracious in receiving us as well. Yet another very senior official who spoke into our report. But, the natural tendency on the part of, dare I say, humans is to kind of be tribal. We like silos. It's a natural, and in fact, I would argue, if I may, that issues concerning missile defense, it's good to have the same engineers and the same scientists in the same room talking with each other. That silo is a good thing. Innovation can be creatively spurred and advanced, and as iron sharpens iron. So we're not arguing in the report against a silo. What we're arguing is to something you just referred to, Tom, which is the challenge of then bringing those silos together, which is absolutely the next step. And that's what we're calling for, is to have someone who's a convening authority to bring these brilliant silos together to ensure that it's an integrated whole.
There may be lessons learned, there may be information that needs to flow, there may be just problems that with $1 million software program, we could bring information together and bring two teams together and actually achieve 3x, 4x, 10x the capability. And those discussions need to happen, and they need to happen not just from a bottom-up standpoint of great ideas flowing up, but from a top-down, how can I be helpful? How can I bring together the tools of the Department of Defense to ensure that we're achieving more with what we have? And that's the role of the integrator.
Yeah. So let's talk about that I word for a minute here, because there's two different, as I've looked at this, there's two competing dictionary definitions of integration. One is to bring things together into a whole, into one, and the other is to have different things working together. And what you've just said there, these silos, these different things working together, I think seems to bias towards the latter. But you've taken, and in the report you again and again talk about the need for more integration. You say the missile defense enterprise is intricate, but it needs to be better integrated. Talk to me about what you mean by integration. What are the things, at what level of integration, and what are the things you looked at in the report to bring together, and for what purpose?
Yeah. It doesn't exist yet. But what we did find is something to learn from the Missile Defense Agency, which was very helpful to us throughout this, amongst others, was to take a look at how MDA has approached, with their unique flexibilities in their acquisition rules, over the several decades, looking at ballistics and hypersonics. There was a sense that there's something to learn that could be applied for cruise and UAS that would be urgent from the standpoint of flexibilities and acquisition rules, particularly if you think about UAS and the gestation periods for Type 4 and Type 5, the large UAS that can carry payloads. The developments in those technologies are 18 to 24 months, some people talk to us about. So to go through a JSITS process to find a way to kill that bullet may be way too slow over time. So the way that we started to think about this, in consultation with senior leaders at the department, several of them, was to think through, is there an MDA lookalike that would be able to have the authority to look at the entire spectrum, not just ballistics and hypersonics, but the other two missile threat types, with the notion, as we've talked about already, that our adversaries have all four. And so they're going to choose all four, perhaps,
right.
If they decide to pull the trigger. Terrible idea, but nevertheless. And so are we with a single view on how do we address those when the time comes? Because as we all know, there'll be very little time to respond. And so there's little, or if any, opportunity for mistake or miscommunication across the DoD organization in this case.
An integrator can come with a tool set. And that tool set could be flexible acquisition authorities, a flexible pot of money to work the seams, a flexible way to start initiatives, which essentially is the requirements process. In other words, to bring forward new ideas quickly. And the reason we went with the integrator idea, we could just continue on the way we're doing. kind of an ad hoc approach, but there's no sense of time urgency here. There's no sense of, I mean, this is the way the department works. It kind of does an incrementally moves forward. There are battles between for budget, for acquisition authority, or so on, and then, quite frankly, the threat is moving faster than the managerial processes can go, and so therefore you need some entity, some individual, or some entity that can speed these really, really important silos forward, get them to work together, and provide the tools and frankly the cover, the political cover, to move forward and to use them. That's what an integrator is all about. And so missile defense was able to do that for many, many years because it was given some different authorities and worked through that. And now is the time where we might need a new, different integrator. And we didn't look at a couple other mission sets which might actually be also conducive to pulling together an integrator. But the idea is that the threat is increasing, we're stovepiped, and we need an entity or someone to ensure and enable, I think that's the key thing, enable the right type of decisions to be made.
Gotcha. So just to clarify, you're not talking about the COCOMs and how they're pulling things together. You're not talking about integrated planning. What you're focused on is kind of the acquisition, the budgeting, the requirements, and really above all the urgency, it sounds like, above all those things.
The existing acquisition budget requirement system is too slow to meet the threat that's evolving. So yes, how do you enable that? The COCOMs have to deal with whatever capabilities they have today. And they can look ahead and try to influence that, but they've got to do the fight today. This is about the fight tomorrow. But it's not 15 years and 20 years into the future. It's 2 to 5 years into the future. And so you need a speedier acquisition system, a speedier budget system, a speedier requirement system to give the tools to the combatant commanders. And that requires a different way of looking at this and a different set of authorities, frankly.
And you spent a lot of time in the report talking about authorities and talking about flexible authorities and speed and all that kind of stuff. And I hear what you're saying in terms of especially these other two mission sets, cruise missile defense, counter UAS. And it sounds like what you're really saying is all of those aspects of missile defense that the services are taking care of. Is that your special target of urgency? Although I also hear you saying everything.
Roger, if you want to take this better, I'm happy to go with it.
Go for it, sir.
Okay, all right.
He's my panel chair after all.
Yeah. If this is not let's take authority away from the services. This is how do you enable whoever is responsible for these various mission sets or various sensing, if you're sensing, if you're targeting, whoever's responsible, to enable them to go faster and to achieve for the enterprise, for the Department of Defense, for the nation, the most optimum types of solutions or multiple optimum types of solutions. And so yeah, this is not a let's go take authority away from the services because they're not doing it right. The services are doing a tremendous job in many, many areas. It's how can we get the services to use faster acquisition authority? How can we get to the services more flexible pots of money so that they can execute on a mission that is going to benefit the entire nation, not necessarily just the Air Force or the Navy or so on. And so this is not a return to command and control, let's tell the services what to do, which has kind of been a history of defense management since 1958. This is a different way of looking at how do we provide central insight and assistance to those who are actually executing. I think that's a major distinction.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of what John Hyten was always going around and saying to anybody who would listen is the need to go fast across the board, the need to use the authorities that are there in the JSIDs, to use the authorities with the urgency that he loved to quote the statutory language on this that already exists there. So I guess what I hear you saying is that there needs to be what you call an enterprise integrator. It sounds to be something that is driving urgency for these mission sets, for these threat sets across the board.
And understands and is willing to use all of those flexible authorities. And when they run up against a barrier, they have the clout to go to Congress or to the secretary or even to the president and say, we need to use something else. And because this is just not going fast enough. Yeah. The smaller entities who are down in the bureaucracy tend not to want to do that, and they become risk averse. And they've been beaten down when they've tried to do some of them have been beaten down when they try to do something innovative. And this larger organization, this larger integrator, this larger managerial leadership needs to be the ones that strips away those barriers and encourages that flexibility. And that's a different, again, it's a different subset of an idea between centralized command and control. We're going to tell you what to do versus you guys go execute, tell us where the barriers are, and we'll try to remove them. Different managerial style.
Now you, in terms of management, in terms of organizational org chart kind of thing, you don't prescribe any one particular entity. You list some criteria. You talk about the importance of consolidating authorities. You kind of complement the consolidation of authorities within MDA, but you also talk for this other function, the consolidation of authorities, and also high level. You kind of throw out the 4-star level thing as the necessary heft. So I recognize that you don't prescribe what that is. I think the language is the deputy secretary or some other component the deputy designates. Right. Could you talk a little bit about some of the options there, recognizing that you didn't prescribe?
Well, first of all, perhaps we should be clear, we weren't trying to be coy. Our panel, in their wisdom, suggested that if we went to option 1, 2, and 3, there would be some enormous downside risk for some of the folks in the components in the department who know far more than we do. And so as, if you will, public administration specialists, we sort of knew where our limits could be. But the scream of this report is to find an integrator that would bring these components together, as you talk about that second option, Tom. But we saw great peril in saying, well, it should be a new COCOM, or it should be, we do talk in the report about an MDA-like organization, perhaps even consideration to MDA having expanded authorities, although that was something that we explored in some conversation and recognized there's a lot of challenges to that. But what Bill said was very correct, very much hopefully resonating in throughout the report, that this is not to raise and destroy what's already existing, but rather to add to and to complement what's in place now and ensure that there's a cohesive whole because of what we've talked about, the fact that there's so many adversaries that now have all 4, and if they're smart, they'll use all 4, and let's pray that they're stupid.
Right. We had some great panel meetings, discussed all the potential options. And really, it got down to, the secretary should pick that, okay? All these options should come up, and that's the secretary's job or the deputy secretary's job to make that decision. And the options are fairly obvious to, if organizationally, where you may want to go. You can create a new organization, you can do MDA, you can do a COCOM, you can, the deputy secretary could just create a new working group to do all this.
You could have the MDEB kind of oversee air defense, CMD, things like that as well.
Exactly. But there's no reason for us to say that. What we wanted to do is start the debate upon whoever it has this function. What kind of integrator should it be? What's the meaning of integration? And as they move forward and think about where are the options to do this, they're thinking through, yeah, we need to go fast, we need to be agile, we need to use authorities because the threat is so compelling. And actually, frankly, it probably could be solved in any of those type of organizations.
Right.
Really.
But letting me reflect back to your criteria, which is am I hearing you right that you are not looking or necessarily advocating, and I recognize you're not recommending a particular thing, an additional layer of bureaucracy that either supersedes or directs the services. You've used the word enabler and not an additional layer of bureaucracy. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I think it's featured, if one thinks about what was Congress looking for in this report. Allow me just to take a moment to think about this with us. First, what are the roles and responsibilities for these various threat types? We don't know. Hopefully a contribution thanks to the partners at DoD who helped us. Clarity around roles and responsibilities for these 4 threat types is a big step forward, but by no means gets us where we need to be. But there could be an argument made that Congress would be perhaps willing to consider how the next step could be the DoD taking action to make these rather patchworky looking roles and responsibilities for the 4 threat types without being impolite and disrespectful, to have an integrator organization that makes sense now that we know who does what. Yes, we could benefit from an organization loosely holding on, but with convening authority, with a close connection to civilian leadership, which is another point that's made about this integrator and should be stressed, but that has the 4-star authority to then, which would be a legislative action, to draw these organizations together in a more cohesive whole. May 9th was a very interesting Senate hearing for amazingly talented, not enough superlatives could be used for the 4 witnesses that were before the Senate Armed Services Committee. And Senator King from Maine asked the question, who do I talk to? Who do I contact when I have a question about missile defense? That's my summary of his question. I thought it was a very thoughtful question, and then the 4 witnesses didn't have it's me. And that's not Roger Kodat being impolite. Again, it was, there isn't someone who, except for the Secretary of Defense perhaps, who has the immediate responsibility to answer that question. Now that person, if the integrator is formulated in an appropriate way, there would be a person who would be responsible and then work with the team to get to the answers. But that was an intriguing moment for me as we were in the final stages of getting this report done.
The department could create a new bureaucracy if it so chooses. And you can't really, but really all they need is an individual with authority, with stature, that is able to work and use and incentivize the type of, and enable the use of the type of authorities that are needed in these various entities. And so is that another box? I don't know, is it coming off the deputy secretary? I mean, there's so many boxes over there and so many spaghetti charts, it's hard to say. But the issue is you need someone there to help the organization get to the next level.
Well, I'll just say, it reminds me a lot of the recommendation that was in the National Defense Strategy Commission from 2018. Actually made a very similar recommendation that there should be some senior DoD official to develop and integrate some long-term, very, very similar, I would say, kind of conclusion to where you came to. So staying with the characteristics of that enterprise integrator that you envision here, staying with characteristics, I'd ask you to maybe think about how you spoke and how you analyzed MDA in its capacity as tech integration authority. You described that, you said they were designated this a long time ago, but it's neither resourced and it's mostly hortatory. They can make suggestions, you note in the report, but they are just suggestions.
Yeah.
So how does your integrated enterprise integrator, how does it do more than make suggestions as you envision it?
I mean, that's TBD, of course, but the vision of MDA having essentially the milestone decision authority, essentially having the ability to decide in these large-scale programs. I'm not sure in the future that's the right question, okay? The future is really kludging together and bringing together a lot of the capabilities that we already have, and they need the authority to do that. Starting off on a new missile interceptor that's going to be deployed in the next 15 or 20 years and having the technical authority over that and can tell ANS and CAPE and all these others to go pound sand, that's not relevant to the fight we're going to have. Relevant to the fight we're going to have is how do we get better sensors in the field quickly? How do we tie them together? How do we use advanced AI and computing to work? And then the testing needs authority over the testing on how this is going to work, and we have to do it rapidly. Not just say, oh, we're going to do a test in 5 years in Kwajalein because that's when the assets are worthwhile. No, we have to do this next week. Mm-hmm. And if we blow a few things up on the pad, that 4-star, whoever it is, can say, wow, we learned a lot from that. And we're not, we need to go beyond this. So technical authority, yeah, there has to be some technical authority there, and they have to use it. But in the milestone decision world and in the big major programs world, which this seems to all play out, that's almost irrelevant to where we're going in the future. At least, in my opinion. This organization needs to figure out how to integrate the capabilities we have and what's in the pipeline.
Gotcha.
I don't know, Roger, I don't know if you want to.
No, totally. The great concern, of course, is on the speed of the development of crews in UAS. Notwithstanding some flexibilities that are provided through the JSITS process, the report is clear that MDA's flexibilities in their acquisition process should be considered very strongly, if not put into place for those 2 other missile threat types. And speed is a critical piece and message of this report. So recognizing how fast, especially with this horrid war in Ukraine, where our adversaries are testing and using their threats and advancing them, unfortunately, in real time against human beings. But the fact is that this is getting only worse, not better. We have Mr. Putin and Mr. Kim meeting, even as we speak, in Russia, talking about what? Rockets. So these are only going to expand in time. We know that technology in the 21st century is just exploding. I think Ray Kurzweil, the chief engineer at Google, talks about expecting tantamount to 20,000 years of technology change in this century alone. I find that hyperbole to get my attention.
No.
But so to one of the points that this report, in terms of talking about speed, is the waste of being slow.
Yeah. So let me give you an example of kind of a vision that you could articulate. And again, goes back to technical authority. And the traditional acquisition system is too slow and too bureaucratic, and frankly, it's not going to go there. The non-program of records are designed, and frankly, in the middle tier acquisition authorities that some organizations are using, are designed to return us back to how we developed the first ICBMs. All right? And we didn't know the detailed requirements of the JSIDS process. We didn't even have, we had some companies we could bet on. And frankly, the department was almost like a venture capitalist in betting on companies at the time. But most importantly, it was acquiring and developing based on time. And all of these capabilities, whether it was the first ICBMs, the second ICBMs, the first space launch, the first satellites, were all done in a period of less than 5 years from the light bulbs on, let's go get a capability, to operationally putting it out in the field. All right? That's the way we need to think. That's not the program of record, 5,000 JSIDs, PPBE process that we have today that, oh, let's deploy something in the 2040s now, because that's really what we're talking about. Yeah. No, how do we affect what's going on in the South China Sea in 2 to 5 years? That's not a program of record. That's a middle tier acquisition. That's a MDA was given authority to do national missile defense in the early 2000s, was able to do that in just a few years. That's the example of what this integrator could do if they got the right authorities and then Congress were to be willing to give them the flexible budgeting that once MDA had.
So let me summarize some of that. One, Bill, you flagged, I would call systems integration. There certainly needs to be some of that to put the pieces together to what we have today. I think we're going to probably see that in high relief with the defense of Guam, as the Army as lead service now goes off and solves that perfect missile defense problem. But again and again in the report and in the conversation just now, you say, okay, I mean, you kind of need that vision thing, somebody high up that leans on everybody and has the implements to lean on everybody to drive the urgency. And where that leads you to, again and again in the report, is acquisition flexibility.
Yeah.
So in your analysis, you talk about the Trump administration's DTM, the Trump DTM, that, as you note in your report, rolled back MDA authorities somewhat. Can you talk to us about how it did that?
So the Trump administration, I think, was trying to, it was trying to figure out how to deal with MTA authorities, middle tier authorities, and the authorities that frankly I was in a wonderful position to help work with Senator McCain to put into law in 2015 and 2016 that the Trump administration was trying to figure out what to do about. And so middle tier was designed to go back to the old way we used to develop and buy things. And the expansion of other transactions was a contracting way of doing around. So they had a problem. They're trying to do this. So what they chose to do is, let's apply this and try to apply this to everyone in the department, and say, well, we got all this flexibility. Let's apply it. And in doing so, I think they, and I'm not sure how it happened, they limited the authority of MDA. They gave other entities greater authority because they had nothing. But MDA had, essentially, we modeled, and I helped with the legislation in this, modeled middle tier authority over MDA. Okay? And I mean, we modeled acquisition reform, over, that was one of the examples. So it got rolled back. And now all of the political constraints and the approval authorities of getting those acquisition authorities are in place now for MDA that are still in place for everyone else. MDA needed more autonomy. It needs more autonomy. It needs more flexibility because of the urgency of the mission. And it had this historically, and the height of it was about 2002, 2003, and subsequently over the years, and ended up in 2017, getting less and less and less of that. No. And we need to go the exact opposite way.
No. It is a bit of a head scratcher. The 2019 Missile Defense Review spent, hundreds or maybe thousands of words talking about the need to go faster for missile defense specifically, and then months later they issue the Trump DTM. And so your report, I think, notably calls for the department to at least look at reversing the DTM, getting rid of it. And I would certainly note that the House Armed Services, in their NDAA language for this year, specifically called for rescinding that specific DTM. So I hope the Biden administration looks at whether they still want to be governed by the Trump administration here.
And because Trump did it, then maybe they want to like overturn it. That would be good.
I don't know. I don't know. But the other thing that you highlight is the CPMR. What is that, and how does that fit into really the management of not just MDA, but management of this enterprise?
Do that definition there?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry.
The joint staffs.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Management review. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. My bad.
No, mine too.
All right. I was speaking in acronyms. Okay. The other acquisition authority. So acquisition is not just contracting. It's not just the 5,000. It's not just the PPBE. You know, it's a requirements process, Jason's process, and that was basically the biggest acquisition end round that the Rumsfeld memos came up in 2002 was to give them that authority. And as much as I love the Joint Staff, as much as the current JSIDS process, the current process there is not fast enough and not it's just not agile enough to do it.
Okay.
In going back to acquisition reform, it was our hope when we gave the service chiefs acquisition authority or put them back into the acquisition process that they would drive change in the requirements process, and that just hasn't happened. So there's no need to put that back in.
Okay. Yeah, one of your two main recommendations, really called out both, getting rid of the DTM impairments, but also the concern about testing, failure review boards, and the CPMR potentially causing delays. But let me kind of pivot now to the air and cruise missile defense of the homeland. You have a couple little interesting case studies in here. One of them is the ACMDH, that the Air Force was designated the lead service for that last year. Similar, I guess, or parallel to the CUS and stuff that the Army's doing. Your concern is, you say maybe too soon to tell, but is the Air Force equipped? Are they moving out with the authorities to do this with the urgency? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. It's relatively new, and there's it's a huge challenge to work on that. So we met with the Secretary of the Air Force, received us, and trust me, it was a very frank conversation, and really appreciated the chance to understand some of his concerns. Moving on this.
Gotcha. Okay. So one of the other things that you were tasked to look at is kind of timelines for these things. Roger, I heard you say a minute ago the waste of time. I thought that was an interesting formulation. Do you have timelines in here? How did you approach that?
So we urged NDA, the 2025 NDAA to have components of the recommendations to be perhaps evidenced from the report in that legislation. And it is an underscoring the urgency, so as quickly as can be taken, actions can be taken, but not so specific a timetable as to have dates and times.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, from a timeline perspective, the department can start implementing, going faster, being more agile, like tomorrow. And kind of going back to your Air Force discussion, the Air Force seems to be slowing things down and seems to be, putting more process back into the system because, data-driven type of a thing. And that may be a luxury that we can no longer have. And so, timelines should be as soon as practically possible. And even if you don't create an integrator, you don't create this, you need to start using the existing authorities that you have and start thinking about developing in time and moving around the the lumbersome 2 to 3 year JSIDS process, and the lumbering 3-year PPBE process, and the 5,000th process, which will deliver capability in the next 15 years, and a contracting FAR process that takes up to 2 years to do an existing contracting action. You know, we've got OTAs, we've got mid-tier, we've got all different ways of moving around, and they need to have the dialogue with Congress immediately on how can we get flexible funds to move some of this around.
So we get a question from the audience that's come in. I think they're kind of pushing back a little bit on you here.
Okay, good.
Says, hey, you know, what's the problem to be solved? Exactly. This sounds like a unity of effort challenge and maybe less about integration. Are there examples where organizations are actually working at cross purposes, headed in the wrong direction, or at least pursuing their mission with great inefficiency? And that comes from retired Brigadier General Chris Spillman. So do you have some examples of that?
I think
is it a unity of effort challenge?
Unity effort challenge is fine, but to do what? And you know, we can pull everyone together and address, and with whatever capabilities I've got, and I'm certain we will come up with a reasonable way of moving forward. The problem is that our adversaries are moving at a much faster rate than we are. And the current unity of effort approach with the current managerial processes we have will, once we get our act together and start executing, is conducive to meeting, getting new capability in the field in 2040. All right? So there's no sense of urgency yet in the department, and there's no understanding that we can do anything else but the existing 5,000 JSIDS and PPBE process to get us there. And so we'll just continuously fight it in the services, and we'll continuously fight it with certain agencies that we've developed, like MDA, and we'll incrementally plod along here, and we can do that. That's the way we've always done. We can always declare it a success. But my challenge, and I think the department's challenge, is we have to accept reality that we no longer are technologically dominant. We have no proliferation has happened, and it's happening daily. That the rest of the world is using and testing capabilities that we didn't think would ever be potentially used against us and will be. And we need to move faster and be more agile in doing this. And so, you know, can we all get together and work around and make the sub-optimized decisions that we've always made in the past and call that unity of effort? Sure. But you need, I would say that that's not going to be successful, and that you need the benefit. And again, the general is very, I understand the fear that this will turn into a command and control type structure, because that's kind of what we kind of do in the Department of Defense, and they'll make stupid decisions and tell people to do something that that's not the type of structure we need to be looking for. We need to be saying, here's somebody with a tool set that's got money, that's got authorities, that has the ability to enable the various, and incentivize the various units out there to go faster, to take a little more risk, and to deliver capability on a time frame that right now seems just completely unacceptable, because, oh my gosh, it's you know, our industrial base can't handle this. Well, there are industrial bases out there that are delivering capability in less than a year. Those are the type of things we need to focus on. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's good. I think that's why I tried to focus on the characteristics of the enterprise integrator that you are recommending here, as opposed to the office or that sort of thing. Because what I'm hearing from you again and again is the need to enable, and it's kind of that vision thing, and a force of urgency. And maybe the enterprise integrator is called the Secretary of Defense. Or Secretary of Defense with somebody who helps them stay on top of this.
Special assistant to Secretary of Defense for this, yeah.
And maybe it's nothing more complicated than that, but it sounds like that urgency, and the drive, which, frankly, is a corollary. If these are indeed weapons of choice, if, as the department senior officials have said, missile defense is not a peripheral concern, it's a foundational concern for the threat that it presents itself, then of course it should be a department-wide concern.
What has got us to where we are today is not going to get us to where we need to be in the future. Let's put it that way. And it's important to look at the ability to drive a different outcome. And I understand the fear that you create something or you designate somebody, and in the typical way, because the Department of Defense is pretty much a Soviet-style command and control structure, and it needs to somehow become a venture capitalistic, entrepreneurial entity, which is completely against its culture, although it was its culture in the 40s, 50s, and early 60s. So we need, if we can return to that, that would be great. But I understand the fear that you start moving around the deck chairs, you're just going to create command and control structures which are going to, screw up whatever success we have. That's a risk. I will guarantee that. But it's going to happen because that's what's happening today, and we need to change what we're doing today.
Great. Well, gentlemen, we've covered a lot of ground here. Appreciate your time today. Any closing thoughts as we round off? Roger, you want to go first?
What do we?
I like what Bill said. What got us here won't get us there. What we've found is incredible men and women, civilian and military, who live and breathe this, some of them for decades. They must have started when they were 12. But truly incredible. But I believe, based on conversations we had with very senior folks, that there's a sense that this thing has to be tied together better. And that this is such a massive, lethal, time-sensitive threat that we haven't seen before. We haven't seen before. But these missile defense weapons are used every day, as we all know, because the fact that they're there and our adversaries know that we're on our game, simply said, is going to keep us safe. And this report takes the yet next step in light of where we are in 2023 and in light of what we see. And I think it's going to make a step forward for us to keep us safe.
Great, thank you.
No, I'd say the world is completely changing. The technological, the commercial marketplace is driving technology today. It's not the military anymore. And DoD needs to adapt to how to look at and bring in that type of technology and just think of an entirely different managerial structure on how it develops capabilities. Because he who figures out how to take advantage of what's going out there in the commercial marketplace will win the next struggle. And right now, we are full of our hubris that, well, our processes work. Well, our processes worked against a very, very we worked against the Soviet Union, who thought in 5-year plans, that had a managerial command and control type of economy. It's not going to work against someone else who thinks in a different way. And we need to take advantage of our advantages, which is the ability to use that commercial marketplace. And that requires changing ideas and looking at how it's all about software. It's all about integration. It's all about moving the pieces together. And to me, that's really, technology is driving our managerial solution here. So I hope the department can do that, and I hope you can help in moving the ball forward on your side.
I'm sure I have lots more to say about integration in the coming months here at CSIS. Thank you both. Thanks for everybody for coming out and tuning in online and the great questions that have come in. And please come back to see us sometime.
Absolutely.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.